Unit 3.3, Part 1, Absolutism in Eastern Europe, the three aging empires of the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Poland. The objectives of this slideshow presentation or essential questions are to analyze the causes for the decline of the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Poland-Lithuania in Europe during the 17th century, to analyze the military, political, and social factors for the rise of absolutism in Austria and Prussia in the 17th and 18th centuries, and to compare and contrast absolutism in Eastern Europe with that of France and Western Europe. To begin, we're going to check in on Eastern Europe with a little bit of overview of what's going on. We now have three aging empires, or as I like to help remember them, HOPRAP. The three aging empires being the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Polish Kingdom, making up the word HOP, giving rise to new empires of Russia, Austria, and Prussia, giving us the word RAP. So from HOP to RAP, our mnemonic device here. So to begin, an overview of the Holy Roman Empire, or the HRE. Religious divisions due to the Reformation in religious wars in the 16th and 17th centuries, we have studied, had split Germany along Catholic, Lutheran, and Calvinist princes, greatly weakening the Holy Roman Empire. The Ottoman Empire could not maintain possessions in Eastern Europe and the Balkans in the face of Austrian and Russian expansion at this time. The Ottoman Empire was built on expansion. The Sultan had absolute power in the empire, and after 1560, the decline in Western expansion resulted in the gradual disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman the Magnificent, who will rule from 1521 to 1566, was perhaps the most powerful ruler in the world during the 16th century, and he will nearly conquer Austria in 1529. He did actually capture Belgrade, or Serbia, nearly half of Eastern Europe, including all Balkan territories, most of Hungary, and part of southern Russia. Highly talented Christian children from the conquered provinces were incorporated into the Ottoman Empire at this time, into the bureaucracy, or to become professionals. This is where we will get some Janissary corps, or those Christian slaves who were not selected for the Ottoman bureaucracy, served loyally instead in the Turkish army. The Ottoman Empire was fairly tolerant regarding religion in its conquered provinces. Our third of the aging empires is that of Poland. At this time, we get liberum veto, which is voting in Polish parliament, had to be unanimous for changes to be made. Thus, little could be done to systematically strengthen the kingdom. Russia and Prussia will encourage certain members to invoke liberum veto to weaken Poland. By 1800, Poland ceased to exist as a sovereign state, carved up by Russia, Austria, and Prussia. So our three aging empires giving rise to our new empires of Russia, Austria, and Prussia, the focus of our Eastern Absolutism lecture. Eastern Absolutism, however, is going to differ from French Absolutism, and that Eastern Absolutism was based on a powerful nobility, weak middle class, and an oppressed peasantry composed of serfs. In France, the nobility's power had been limited, the middle class was relatively strong, and peasants were generally free from serfdom. Louis XIV built French absolutism upon the foundations of a well-developed medieval monarchy and a strong royal bureaucracy. So Eastern European absolutism is going to differ. Endless wars of the 17th century had allowed monarchs to increase their power by building large armies, increasing taxation, and suppressing representative institutions. So the threat of war with European and Asian invaders in Eastern Europe were important motivations for the Eastern European monarchs' drive to consolidate power. It will result in reduced political power of the nobility. However, nobles will gain much greater power over the peasantry in Eastern Europe. Three important methods of gaining absolute power were kings being able to impose and collect permanent taxes without the consent of their subjects. States maintained permanent standing armies, and states conducted relations with other states as they pleased. Absolutism in Eastern Europe will reach its height with Peter the Great of Russia. And absolutism in Prussia, as we're going to see, is stronger than it was in Austria. As we will see, the use of serfdom in Eastern Europe is one of the major differences in absolutism in Western Europe and absolutism in Eastern Europe. The rulers of Eastern Europe, like those in the West, had to labor to build strong absolutist states in the 17th century, but they were built on very different social and economic foundations from those in Western Europe, namely the use of serfdom and the strong nobility who's going to benefit from that serfdom. After 1300, the lords in Eastern Europe revived serfdom to combat increasing economic challenges. The areas that will be most affected include Bohemia, Silesia, Hungary, Eastern Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia. There had been a drop in population in the 14th century, especially from the Black Death, that had created a tremendous labor shortage and hard times for the nobles. Lords began to demand that their kings and princes issue laws restricting or eliminating peasants' right of moving freely. By 1500, Prussian territories had laws requiring runaway peasants to be hunted down and returned to their lords. And there are also laws that were passed that froze peasants in their social class, so no social mobility. Lords will confiscate peasant lands and impose heavier labor obligations. The legal system will become monopolized by the local lord. Non-serf peasants were also affected. In certain regions, peasants were required to work 3 to 4 days without pay per week for their local lord. Serfdom will become consolidated between 1500 and 1650. Hereditary serfdom was reestablished in Poland, Russia, and Prussia by the mid-17th century. In Poland, nobles gained complete control over peasants in 1574 and could legally impose death penalties on serfs whenever they wished. In 1694, the Russian Tsar rescinded a 9-year term limit on recovery of runaway serfs. This time period will see the growth of estate agriculture, especially in Poland and Eastern Germany. Food prices at this time will increase due to the influx of gold and silver from the Americas. Surpluses in wheat and timber were sold to big foreign merchants who exported them to feed the wealthier West. So the question is, why serfdom in Eastern Europe and not Western Europe? The reasons for this were not necessarily economic. If you'll remember, the West had also been devastated by the Black Death, and the resulting labor shortage had actually helped labor there. Political reasons are more plausible. Supremacy of noble landlords. Most kings, in fact, were essentially first among equals in the noble class and directly benefited from serfdom. Eastern lords have more political power than in the West, and therefore monarchs in the East needed the nobles. Constant warfare in Eastern Europe and political chaos resulted in noble landlord class increasing their political power at the expense of the monarchs. Weak Eastern kings had little power to control landlord policies aimed at peasants, and strong sovereign kings were not in place prior to 1650. Peasants were weaker politically than in the West, so uprisings by peasants did not succeed, and peasant solidarity in the East was weaker than Western communities. Also, landlords undermined medieval privileges of towns and power of urban classes, and the population of towns and importance of urban middle classes will decline significantly in the East. So now that we've done an overview of Eastern Europe and talked about some of the fundamental differences between absolutism in Eastern Europe and that of Western Europe, we need to turn our attention to the new rising empires, and we'll be beginning with the Austrian Empire. So the emerging Austrian Empire, the ruler of Austria had been traditionally selected as the Holy Roman Emperor, but after the War of Spanish Succession from 1701 to 1713 and the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, the Spanish throne was now occupied by the Bourbons, and Habsburg power was concentrated in Austria. The Austrian Habsburg Empire included Naples, Sardinia, and Milan in Italy, the Austrian Netherlands, or Belgium, Hungary, and Transylvania, or modern-day Romania. Ineffective leadership, however, by the Habsburg rulers in the Holy Roman Empire will force monarchs to turn their attention inward and eastward to consolidate their diverse holdings into a strong, unified state. The reorganization of Bohemia was now a major step towards absolutism in Austria. The Czech or Bohemian nobility was wiped out during the Bohemian phase of the 30 Years' War, and Ferdinand II, between 1619 and 1637, will redistribute these Czech lands to aristocratic soldiers from all over Europe. And this is going to put in place a direct rule over Bohemia. And at this time, conditions for serfs will also decline. The old hereditary provinces of Austria proper will be centralized by Ferdinand III between 1637 and 1657. He will also create a permanent standing army unprecedented for the Habsburg Empire. Hungary was the third and most probably the largest part of Austria's dominion. The Magyars were the dominant cultural group, and serfdom will intensify in Habsburg lands. Government of the Austrian Empire. Austria was not a national state. Its multinational empire included Austria proper, the Germans and the Italians, Bohemia with the Czechs, and Hungary with the Hungarians, Serbs, Croatians, and Romanians. And no single constitutional system or administration existed in the empire, as each region had a different legal relationship to the emperor. Important Habsburg rulers that we're going to note here are Ferdinand II, who we spoke about, who had taken control of Bohemia, or taken direct control over Bohemia in the 30 Years' War, ruling from 1619 to 1637. Next, we have Ferdinand II, who had been responsible for centralizing government in the old hereditary provinces of Austria proper, and who had ruled from 1637 to 1657. Next, we have Leopold I, who will rule from 1658 to 1705. He severely restricted Protestant worship, which is going to allow Catholicism to fuse the identity of the Austrian Empire. Also, the siege of Vienna will successfully repel the Turks from the gates of Vienna in 1683, which will be the last attempt by the Ottoman Empire to take Central Europe. In 1697, Prince Eugene of Savoy will lead Austria's forces to a victory over the Ottomans at Zinta, thus securing Austria from future Ottoman attacks. So under Leopold I, we will see the last attempt by the Ottoman Empire to take Central Europe, and also a victory securing Austria from future Ottoman attacks. Our next, and here's a portrait of the siege of Vienna in 1683, which was the last attempt by the Ottoman Empire to take Central Europe. Next, we have the Habsburg ruler Emperor Charles VI, who will rule from 1711 to 1740. Under his rule, Austria will be saved from French expansion during the War of Spanish Succession, with its alliance with Britain and the military leadership of Prince Eugene. He will issue the Pragmatic Sanction in 1713, which states that Habsburg possessions were to never be divided and henceforth to be passed intact to a single heir. Due to this, his daughter Maria Theresa will inherit Charles's empire in 1740 and rule for 40 years. And we will come back to these individuals as we keep strolling through history. But to mention a couple of the powerful and most important Habsburg rulers that will come out of the Austrian Empire. Next, we need to turn our attention to the second most successful state between 1620 and 1740, and that is Prussia. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the Hohenzollern family had ruled parts of eastern Germany as the imperial electors of Brandenburg and the Dukes of Prussia. The title of elector gave its holder the privilege of being one of the only 7 princes or archbishops entitled to elect the Holy Roman Emperor, but the electors had little real power. When the 20-year-old Frederick William, who will later be known as the Great Elector, came to power in 1640, he was determined to unify his 3 provinces and enlarge them by diplomacy and war. These provinces were Brandenburg, Prussia, inherited in 1618, and scattered holdings along the Rhine, inherited in 1614. He is a strict Calvinist, although he'll grant religious toleration to Catholics and Jews. And he was a great admirer of the Swedish system of government and the economic power of the Netherlands. An ongoing struggle between Sweden and Poland for control of the Baltic after 1648 and the wars of Louis XIV would create an atmosphere of permanent crisis, where Prussia was invaded in 1656 to 1657 by the Tartars of southern Russia, who killed or carried off as slaves more than 50,000 people. The invasion weakened the noble estates and would strengthen the urgency of the electors' demands for more money and for a larger army. Prussian nobles, however, would refuse to join representatives of towns in resisting royal power. The Great Elector, Frederick William, will establish Prussia as a great power and lay the foundation for the future unification of Germany in the 19th century. His most significant accomplishment is he oversaw Prussian militarism and created the most efficient army in Europe. He employed military power and taxation to unify his Rhine holdings, Prussia and Brandenburg, into a strong state. And he increased military spending achieved through heavy taxes, twice that of Louis XIV in France. Prussian nobility would not be exempted from tax paying, and soldiers also served as tax collectors and policemen, thus expanding the government's bureaucracy. Junkers, or the nobility of Brandenburg and Prussia, and also reluctant allies of Frederick William and his consolidation of the Persian state, actually will form the backbone of the Prussian military officer corps. These nobles and landowners dominated the estates of Brandenburg and Prussia, and in 1653, hereditary subjugation of serfs was established as a way of compensating the nobles for their support of the crown. This will encourage industry and trade, and they will begin to import skilled craftsmen and Dutch farmers. New industries will emerge, such as woolens, cotton, linens, velvet, lace, silk, soap, paper, and iron products. And efforts at overseas trade will largely fail due to Prussia's lack of ports and naval experience. William the Frederick was not only important because of his Prussian militarism and military power and bringing the Prussian to its largest territory expansion, but his ancestors would soon become the kings of Prussia, no longer electors. The title of king will be awarded to Frederick I, or Elector Frederick III, given the title the Ostentatious, ruled from 1688 to 1713, and he will be given the title of first king of Prussia and the son of William Frederick. He is the most popular of the Hohenzollern kings, and he sought to imitate the court of Louis XIV. He will also encourage higher education and found a university and encouraged the founding of an academy of science, and also will welcome immigrant scholars. He fought in 2 wars against Louis XIV to preserve the European balance of power, the first being the War of the League of Augsburg from 1688 to 1697, which we discussed in our last lecture, and the War of Spanish Succession 1701 to 1713 that came at the end of our religious wars discussion. He allied with the Habsburgs during this time, and the Elector of Brandenburg, Prussia, was now recognized internationally as the King of Prussia in return for their aid to the Habsburgs. And this is how Frederick I gets his title as the first King of Prussia, for his aid to the Habsburgs during the War of the League of Augsburg and the War of Spanish Succession. Frederick William I, from 1713 to 1714 is his rule, the grandson of Frederick William, and who will get the namesake the Soldier's King, was the most important Hohenzollern regarding the development of Prussian absolutism. He was a Calvinist, like his father and his grandfather, and was obsessed with finding tall soldiers for his army, very obsessed with the military and also his own stature. He infused militarism into all of Prussian society, and Prussia will become known as the Sparta of the North. One notable diplomat is known for saying Prussia is not a state with an army, but an army with a state. The society becomes very rigid and highly disciplined. Unquestioning obedience will become the highest virtue. Most militaristic society of modern times. Under Frederick William I, the Soldier King, we will see the army doubled in size. We'll see the best army in Europe at this time, and the fourth largest army next to France, Russia, and Austria. 80% of government revenues at this time went towards the military, and the Prussian army was designed to avoid war through deterrence. The only time Frederick William I fought a war was when Sweden occupied a city in northern Germany. The Swedes were subsequently forced out. The term Prussian survives today as a term that means duty, obedience, service, elitist, and regimented. Even during World War II, Hitler himself distrusted Prussian officers. And it's at this time that we will also see the most efficient bureaucracy in Europe. We removed the last of the parliamentary estates and local self-government, demanded absolute obedience and discipline from civil servants. Promotions were based on merit, and some commoners were able to rise to positions of power. There's also very high levels of taxation. The Junkers, or the nobility of Brandenburg and Prussia, remain the officers cast in the army in return for supporting the king's absolutism. And it's at this time that we established compulsory elementary education in 1717, which established approximately 1,000 schools for peasant children. Frederick II, who we'll talk more about when we get into enlightened despots in Unit 4.1, is actually the next of our Prussian monarchs or Prussian kings. He will be the most powerful and famous of the Prussian kings and will be of more pertinence to us as we get into enlightened despotism. But important to note here that he will increase Prussia's territory at the expense of the Austrian Habsburgs. And so he will follow this line, but we will come up to him as we do filling in the later years when we get into enlightened despotism and the Enlightenment, also as we move through the scientific revolution in our next unit. We'll be tuning in for part 2 of absolutism in Eastern Europe and finishing out with Russia for this unit in the next lecture.